The howling wind battered against the solitary cabin as Yates Blackburn stared at the woman on his doorstep, her eyes hollow with hunger and desperation. The small bundle clutched to her chest, whimpering softly in the bitter cold of the Montana winter of 1882. For a moment, all he could do was stand there, his lantern casting long shadows across her gaunt face as snow swirled around them both, the silence broken only by the wailing of the merciless blizzard that had likely driven her to his remote homestead. "Please," she whispered, her voice barely audible above the storm. "I have nowhere else to go." Yates had lived alone for 3 years since returning from driving cattle up from Texas, choosing isolation over the memories that haunted him in civilization. Now this woman, this stranger, stood before him like a ghost materialized from the swirling snow. Her clothes, though once fine, were tattered and inadequate for the brutal winter. The child in her arms couldn't have been more than a year old. "Come in," he said gruffly, stepping aside. "This is your home now, at least until the storm passes." Relief washed over her face as she stepped across the threshold, nearly collapsing as the warmth of the cabin enveloped her. Yates quickly closed the door against the howling wind and moved to stoke the fire in the stone hearth. "Thank you," she said, her voice trembling. "I'm Abigail Sumner. This is my daughter, Emma." Yates nodded, uncomfortable with the sudden intrusion into his solitary existence. "Yates Blackburn, sit by the fire. I'll get you something to eat." Abigail sank into the chair closest to the hearth, cradling her daughter close. The child had stopped crying, soothed by the warmth, her wide eyes taking in this new shelter. Yates moved about the cabin, gathering a bowl of stew he'd made earlier and a cup of coffee. It wasn't much, but it was hot. "When did you last eat?" he asked, handing her the bowl. "Yesterday morning," Abigail admitted, accepting the food with trembling hands. "We had a little bread left." Yates watched as she ate slowly, savoring each spoonful. She was young, perhaps 25, with auburn hair that might have been beautiful if not matted from the journey. Even in her haggard state, there was a dignity about her that spoke of better days. "Where were you headed?" he asked. Abigail paused, looking down at her sleeping daughter. "Nowhere." "Everywhere?" "My husband died 3 months ago in Helena. Fever took him. The bank took our home 2 weeks later." Her voice hardened. "They didn't care that I had a child, said debts had to be paid." Yates knew that story all too well. The West was littered with tales of widows cast aside by circumstance. "I've been traveling, looking for work," she continued, "but no one wants to hire a woman with a baby." She looked up at him, her green eyes direct. "I'm not asking for charity, Mr. Blackburn. I can work. I can cook, clean, mend clothes. I just need shelter until I can find something permanent." Yates studied her for a long moment. He hadn't spoken more than a dozen words to another human being in months, preferring the company of his horses and the silence of the mountains. Yet something about her determination moved him. "The nearest town is 40 miles south," he said. "No one's hiring this time of year and the trail won't be passable again until spring." He gestured around the cabin. "It's not much, but you can stay. Like I said, this is your home now. At least until you find something better." Tears welled in Abigail's eyes, but she blinked them away. "Thank you," she said simply. "We won't be a burden." That night, Yates gave up his bed to Abigail and her daughter, making a pallet for himself near the fire. As he drifted towards sleep, he listened to the soft breathing of the child and realized how quiet his cabin had been before they arrived. The following days established a tentative routine. True to her word, Abigail proved herself useful. She cleaned the cabin with a thoroughness it hadn't seen since Yates built it, mended his shirts with neat, even stitches, and stretched their provisions with clever cooking. Emma, once properly fed and warm, revealed herself to be a cheerful baby with her mother's green eyes and a laugh that echoed through the small cabin. Yates found himself increasingly drawn to Abigail's quiet strength. She never complained, even when he knew her hands were chapped from washing clothes in cold water or her back ached from chopping vegetables for stew. Instead, she worked diligently, often humming softly to Emma as she moved about the cabin. One evening, as snow continued to fall outside, Abigail sat mending one of Yates's shirts by the fire while he whittled a small wooden horse. "You're good with your hands," she observed, watching as the figure took shape beneath his knife. Yates shrugged. "My father taught me. Said a man should know how to make something beautiful, not just useful." "Was he a carpenter?" "No, horse breeder, best in West Texas." Yates's knife paused. "Lost everything in the war, never quite recovered." Abigail nodded, understanding in her eyes. "My father was the same. The war changed him. He came back different." She hesitated. "Were you in the war?" Tail end of it. "Too young to do much fighting, but old enough to see what it did to men." He resumed his whittling. "That's why I came out here, fewer ghosts." "Until we showed up," Abigail said softly. Yates looked up, meeting her eyes. "You're not ghosts, you're very much alive." A small smile touched her lips, the first he'd seen. "Yes, I suppose we are." The following morning, Yates woke to find Abigail already up. Emma balanced on her hip as she stirred a pot of oatmeal. Sunlight streamed through the windows, the storm having finally broken during the night. "Good morning," she said, her voice warmer than it had been. "I hope you don't mind, but I found some dried apples and added them to the oatmeal." "Don't mind at all," Yates replied, oddly pleased by the simple domesticity of the scene. After breakfast, he pulled on his heavy coat. "I need to check the livestock. Storm's over, but there might be damage to the fences." Abigail nodded. "We'll be fine here." Outside, the world was transformed. Snow blanketed everything, pristine and glittering in the morning light. Yates trudged through drifts toward the small barn where he kept his 2 horses and milk cow. The animals had weathered the storm well, though one section of the barn roof had developed a leak that would need repair. As he worked, Yates found his thoughts returning to Abigail. In just a few days, she had transformed his sparse cabin into something approaching a home. The realization was unsettling. He had carefully constructed his solitude, brick by brick, year by lonely year. Now this woman and her child had walked through his walls as easily as they'd walked through his door. When he returned to the cabin hours later, the smell of fresh bread greeted him. Abigail had found his small store of flour and had somehow managed to bake a perfect golden loaf in his temperamental oven. "You didn't have to do that," he said, hanging his coat by the door. "I wanted to," she replied. "It's the least I can do for your hospitality." That evening, as they shared the bread with the last of the stew, Emma crawled from her mother's lap and made her way determinedly toward Yates. She pulled herself up using his pant leg and stared up at him, offering a drooly smile that revealed 4 tiny teeth. "She likes you," Abigail said softly. Yates looked down at the child, uncertain. "I don't know much about babies." "You don't have to, just be kind to her." Abigail watched as Emma patted Yates's knee. "She's a good judge of character." Hesitantly, Yates reached down and lifted Emma onto his lap. The child immediately grabbed at his beard, fascinated by the texture. "Gentle, Emma," Abigail chided, but her eyes were warm as she watched them. "It's all right," Yates said, carefully extracting his beard from the baby's grip. "She's just curious." As the days passed, the makeshift family settled into a comfortable rhythm. Yates found reasons to delay, suggesting they might want to move on. When spring came, the roof needed repair. The corral fence was weak. He should teach Abigail how to milk the cow properly. Each excuse extended their stay, and each day made it harder to imagine the cabin without them. One afternoon in early February, Yates returned from checking his trap lines to find Abigail standing outside, Emma bundled against the cold, both of them looking up at the clear blue sky. "What are you doing out here?" he asked, approaching them. "It's too cold for the little one." "Teaching her about the world," Abigail replied, her breath clouding in the air. "I don't want her first memories to be only of 4 walls and a roof, even if we're grateful for them." Yates studied Abigail's profile. The weeks of regular meals and rest had restored a healthy glow to her skin, and her auburn hair, now clean and often braided, caught the winter sunlight like polished copper. "What will you do when spring comes?" He asked suddenly, the question that had been weighing on him finally finding voice. Abigail turned to look at him, her expression carefully neutral. I suppose I'll need to find work. A town with a school eventually for Emma. You could stay, Yates said, the words escaping before he could consider them properly. The cabin's small, but I could add another room. There's good grazing land for a few more cattle, maybe even plant a proper garden. Abigail's eyes widened slightly. Yates, I couldn't ask that of you. You're not asking, I'm offering. He shifted uncomfortably. Unless you'd rather go. It's not that, she said quickly. But what would people think? A woman and her child living with a man who's not her husband. Yates hadn't considered that. Isolated as they were, he'd almost forgotten the rules that governed society. I hadn't thought about that, he admitted. A shadow crossed Abigail's face. Neither had I until now. She looked down at Emma, who was reaching toward a nearby pine tree, fascinated by its snow-laden branches. Perhaps it would be best if we left when the weather improves. That night, a strained silence hung between them as they ate dinner. Emma, oblivious to the tension, babbled happily as she smashed bits of potato between her fingers. After putting the child to bed, Abigail returned to the main room to find Yates staring into the fire. I've been thinking, he said without looking up, about what you said earlier. Abigail sat down opposite him. Yes, I don't much care what people think, Yates continued, never have. But I understand why you might. He finally looked at her. There's a solution if you're willing to consider it. What kind of solution? Marriage, he said simply. Not right away, he added quickly, seeing her surprise. But if you stayed, and if in time you found you could be happy here with me, then perhaps. Abigail was silent for a long moment. Yates, we barely know each other. I know, he acknowledged, and I'm not asking for an answer now. Just asking you to think about staying, about giving us time to see if it could work. Abigail looked at him thoughtfully. Why? Why would you want us to stay? Yates struggled to find the words. Because the cabin feels like a home with you and Emma in it. Because I've been alone for a long time, and I didn't realize how much I'd forgotten about living until you knocked on my door. A small smile curved Abigail's lips. That's a good answer. February melted into March, and as the snow began to recede, revealing patches of earth and early wildflowers, Abigail and Yates fell into a comfortable companionship. He taught her to ride his gentler horse, showed her how to shoot his rifle just in case, he said, and began work on adding a small room to the cabin. Abigail, for her part, planted a garden as soon as the ground thawed enough, using seeds she found in Yates's stores. She transformed his sparse existence with small touches, a bunch of early wildflowers on the table, curtains made from an old sheet, stories read aloud in the evenings from one of the few books he owned. Emma grew stronger each day, now walking confidently and adding new words to her vocabulary. Ye became her name for Yates, and he found himself responding to it as naturally as if he'd been called that all his life. One evening in late March, as they sat outside watching the sunset paint the mountains gold and crimson, Emma asleep on a blanket beside them, Abigail broke a comfortable silence. I've been thinking about what you said, about staying. Yates's heart quickened, but he kept his voice steady. And I think I'd like to, she said softly. Stay, I mean, at least for now. Yates nodded, afraid to say too much, afraid to reveal how much her decision meant to him. But, she continued, I need to be clear about something. She turned to face him fully. I won't marry again for convenience or necessity, if that's ever to happen, it would need to be for love. For love, Yates repeated, the word feeling strange on his tongue. That's fair, Abigail smiled, relief evident in her expression. Good, then we understand each other. As April arrived, bringing longer days and the return of birdsong to the forest around the cabin, Yates rode into town for supplies. It was his first trip since before the winter storms, and he took the opportunity to stock up on necessities: flour, sugar, coffee, ammunition, as well as a few items he'd never before had reason to purchase. Fabric for Abigail to make Emma a new dress, a picture book for the child and seeds for the expanding garden. In the general store, Mrs. Peterson, the proprietor's wife, eyed his unusual purchases with interest. "Expecting company, Mr. Blackburn?" she asked as she totaled his goods. "No," Yates replied, uncomfortable with her scrutiny. "Just stocking up. Fabric and a child's book." Her eyebrow arched. "Seems peculiar for a bachelor." Yates hesitated, then decided there was no point in hiding the truth. The town would learn of Abigail and Emma eventually. "I have a widow and her child staying with me. They arrived during the winter storms." Mrs. Peterson's eyes widened. "A widow, you say, living in your cabin all this time?" The disapproval in her voice was unmistakable. "She had nowhere else to go," Yates said, his voice hardening. "I wasn't about to turn them away to freeze." "Of course not," Mrs. Peterson said, though her expression suggested otherwise. "And how long will this arrangement continue?" "As long as they want to stay," Yates replied firmly. "It's their home now, too." The words hung in the air between them, a declaration he hadn't fully articulated even to himself until that moment. Mrs. Peterson pressed her lips into a thin line but said nothing more as she wrapped his purchases. On the ride back to the cabin, Yates considered the implications of what he'd said. The town would talk, of course. Isolated as his homestead was, gossip was the main entertainment in these parts. But he found he didn't care. What mattered was the woman and child waiting for him, the home they were building together. When he arrived, Abigail was outside hanging laundry, Emma playing with a wooden horse he'd carved for her. At the sound of his approach, both looked up, their faces breaking into smiles that eased the tension he'd carried from town. "You're back earlier than expected," Abigail said, coming to help him unload the supplies. "Got what we needed," he replied. "And this." He handed her the fabric, watching as her eyes lit up at the cheerful blue calico. "It's beautiful," she breathed. "Emma will look lovely in it, thank you." "There's more," he said, somewhat shyly, giving her the book for Emma. Abigail's smile deepened as she flipped through the colorful pages. "She'll love this. You're very thoughtful, Yates." The simple praise warmed him more than he cared to admit. "It's nothing," he mumbled, turning to unload the rest of the supplies. Later, after Emma was asleep and they sat by the fire, Yates told Abigail about his encounter in town. "They'll talk," he warned. "People always do." Abigail nodded, her expression thoughtful. "I expected as much. Does it bother you?" "No," Yates said truthfully, "but I'm concerned it might bother you." She was quiet for a moment, staring into the flames. "Once, perhaps it would have. I was raised to care very much about what people thought." A small, sad smile curved her lips. "But losing everything has a way of changing your priorities. What matters now is that Emma is safe and happy, that we have a roof over our heads." She looked up at him. "That we're together." The words hung between them, laden with meaning neither was quite ready to voice. "Together," Yates repeated softly. Spring advanced into early summer, the mountains around them exploding with wildflowers and verdant growth. The garden Abigail had planted flourished under her care, promising vegetables for the coming months. Yates completed the addition to the cabin, a small but comfortable bedroom for Emma, with windows that looked out onto the mountains. One warm June evening, they sat on the porch watching Emma chase fireflies in the gathering twilight. The child's laughter echoed across the clearing, a sound that never failed to lighten Yates's heart. "I received a letter today," Abigail said suddenly, "from my sister in St. Louis." Yates turned to look at her, a knot forming in his stomach. "I didn't know you had a sister." "Margaret," Abigail confirmed. "She's been looking for me since Thomas died. The postmaster in Helena finally forwarded her letter here." "What does she want?" Yates asked, trying to keep his voice neutral. "She wants us to come to St. Louis. She and her husband have a large house, connections that could help me find suitable work." Abigail's eyes remained on Emma, who had given up on catching fireflies and was now spinning in circles, arms outstretched. "She says Emma could have advantages there that she couldn't have here." The knot in Yates's stomach tightened. "And what do you want?" Abigail turned to him then, her eyes serious. "I've been asking myself that same question all day." She reached out hesitantly and placed her hand over his. "This is our home now, Yates, Emma's and mine, if you still want us to stay." Relief washed through him so intense it almost made him dizzy. "I do," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "More than anything." Abigail's hand tightened on his. "There's something else I should tell you." She took a deep breath. "I've been keeping a ledger, recording everything we've used: food, supplies, the fabric you bought. I intend to repay you when I can." Yates frowned. "That's not necessary." "It is to me," she insisted. "I told you when I arrived that I wasn't looking for charity." "I meant it." "It's not charity," Yates said firmly. "It's—" He struggled to find the right words. "It's family. What's mine is yours now, both of you." Abigail's eyes widened at the declaration. "Yates." "I'm not good with words," he continued, determined now to say what had been building in his heart for months. "But I know what I feel. When you knocked on my door that night, I thought I was just offering shelter from a storm. I didn't realize you were offering me a chance at a life I'd given up hoping for." Tears welled in Abigail's eyes, but she smiled through them. "I think I've been falling in love with you since that first night when you gave up your bed without a second thought." Yates reached up to brush a tear from her cheek. "And I've been falling in love with you every day since." Their first kiss was gentle, tentative, a question and an answer all at once. When they pulled apart, Emma was standing before them, her small face curious. "Mama?" she asked, reaching for Abigail. Abigail lifted her daughter onto her lap. "It's all right, sweetheart. Mama and Yates are just very happy." Emma looked between them, then reached for Yates's hand, placing it on top of her mother's where it rested on her small knee. "Yay happy," she declared. The simple gesture, the child's innocent understanding of what was happening, brought a lump to Yates's throat. "Yes," he managed. "Very happy." The following Sunday they rode into town together, Emma seated in front of Abigail on the gentle mare. It was time, they'd decided, to face whatever gossip had spread and to present themselves as a family, regardless of what anyone might think. The small church was nearly full when they arrived, and a hush fell over the congregation as they entered. Yates felt Abigail stiffen beside him but was proud when she held her head high, meeting the curious stares with dignity. After the service, as people milled about outside, the Reverend approached them, his expression kind. "Mr. Blackburn," he said, extending his hand. "It's been some time since we've seen you in church." "Yes, sir," Yates replied, shaking the offered hand. "I'd like you to meet Abigail Sumner and her daughter, Emma." The Reverend turned to Abigail with a warm smile. "Mrs. Sumner, welcome to our community." "Thank you, Reverend," Abigail said, her voice steady despite the whispers they could both hear from nearby congregants. "I understand you've been staying at Mr. Blackburn's homestead," the Reverend continued, lowering his voice slightly. "A difficult situation, I'm sure, especially with a child." Before Abigail could respond, Yates spoke up. "Actually, Reverend, we were hoping to speak with you about performing a marriage ceremony." Abigail's head whipped around to stare at him, surprise evident in her expression. "If Mrs. Sumner agrees, of course," Yates added quickly, suddenly uncertain if he'd overstepped. The Reverend's eyebrows rose. "I see, and is this a matter of convenience, Mr. Blackburn?" "No, sir," Yates said firmly. "It's a matter of love." The Reverend studied them both for a moment, then nodded. "Very well. Why don't you come by the parsonage tomorrow and we can discuss the details?" As the Reverend moved away to greet other parishioners, Abigail turned to Yates, her expression a mix of shock and amusement. "That was quite a proposal, Mr. Blackburn." Yates felt heat rise to his face. "I'm sorry, I should have asked you properly first." "Yes, you should have," she agreed, but her eyes were sparkling. "Fortunately for you, my answer is yes." Relief and joy surged through him. "Really?" "Really," she confirmed. "Though I expect a proper proposal later, on one knee and everything." Yates laughed, not caring who heard or saw. "Yes, madam." They were married 2 weeks later in a simple ceremony at the church. Emma serving as flower girl, toddling down the aisle strewing wildflower petals with more enthusiasm than accuracy. Despite the short notice, most of the town turned out, curiosity gradually giving way to genuine good wishes as they witnessed the obvious love between the couple. For their wedding night, Abigail's friend Sarah from town stayed with Emma, giving the newlyweds a rare night alone. Under a blanket of stars, Yates and Abigail shared their hopes and dreams for the future: more children, perhaps a larger herd of cattle, maybe even a small school for the homesteaders' children scattered throughout the valley. "I never expected to be happy again," Abigail confessed as they lay together in the quiet darkness. "After Thomas died, I thought that part of my life was over." Yates pulled her closer. "And I never expected to find happiness at all, not out here, not anywhere. And now?" she asked, her head resting on his chest. "Now I can't imagine being anywhere but here with you and Emma." He pressed a kiss to her forehead. "You've given me a family, Abigail, a home." She smiled against his skin. "That's funny, because that's exactly what you gave us when you opened your door that night in the storm. A home. This is your home now." He repeated the words he'd said to her that first night, but this time they carried the weight of promise, of permanence, of a future built together. "Our home," Abigail corrected softly. "Forever." In the years that followed, the small cabin grew room by room as their family expanded. 2 sons joined Emma, first William, born the following spring, and then James, 2 years later. The garden doubled, then tripled in size. Yates's small herd of cattle multiplied, providing a comfortable living for the family. Emma grew into a bright, curious girl who loved books and horses in equal measure. By the time she was 10, she could ride as well as any boy in the valley and read better than most adults. The boys followed in their father's footsteps, learning to work with the land and the animals, but they also inherited their mother's love of learning. Abigail never replied to her sister's invitation to St. Louis, though she maintained a correspondence that eventually led to Margaret and her family visiting one summer, their city clothes and manners amusingly out of place on the homestead. After a week of fresh air, home-cooked meals, and the simple joys of country living, even Margaret had to admit that perhaps Abigail had found something in Montana that money couldn't buy. On the 10th anniversary of the night Abigail knocked on Yates's door, they sat on the porch of their now substantial home, watching their children play in the yard as the sun set behind the mountains. "Do you ever regret it?" Yates asked suddenly. "Staying here, I mean. You could have had a different life in St. Louis." Abigail looked at him, the years having added a few lines around her eyes, but none of the hardness that had been there when they first met. "Not for a single moment," she said firmly. "That night I was just looking for shelter from the storm. Instead, I found everything I never knew I wanted." Yates reached for her hand, still marveling at how perfectly it fit in his. "That makes 2 of us." As darkness fell and they called the children in for supper, Yates paused in the doorway, looking at the family that had transformed his solitary existence into a life overflowing with love and purpose. The memory of a cold, desperate knock on his door a decade ago still sent a shiver of gratitude through him. One simple act of kindness had changed everything. "Coming, Yates?" Abigail called from inside, where warmth and laughter awaited. "Yes," he answered, stepping through the doorway into the home they had built together. "I'm home."